January 1943. A bitter wind scraped across the snow-covered pines outside the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht compound in Zul. Deep underground, in a concrete operations room lit by a single row of flickering lamps, 3 German analysts stood over a steel table. Their uniforms were neat, their faces drawn, their breath faint in the cold air that seeped through the bunker's walls. Spread before them were the documents that should not have existed in this room. Captured American supply charts taken from a destroyed transport vehicle in North Africa. The papers were crisp, printed with clean lines, and filled with numbers that looked almost unreal. Columns of fuel shipments, tonnage tables, replacement schedules, monthly aircraft output, endless rows of trucks, cranes, spare engines, medical kits, rations, ammunition crates. The men traced the graphs slowly, their fingers pausing at each upward curve. The room remained silent except for the steady hum of ventilation fans. There was no dramatic proclamation, no sudden outburst, just a quiet, dawning comprehension. These numbers were not propaganda. They were raw, unstoppable industrial capacity, and as the analysts exchanged a single grim look, they understood the truth settling heavily in the air. Germany could never outproduce what it was now facing. The weight of that realization leads into the deeper world this war had already created in the years before the captured charts reached that bunker table. The imbalance shaping their meaning had already been set in motion. It began long before 1943, before the first shots of the war, before the first German tank rolled across a border. It began with 2 nations building for 2 very different kinds of conflict. Germany entered the Second World War with a strategic mindset rooted in speed. Its leaders believed wars were decided in weeks or months, not years. Blitzkrieg reflected not only a tactic but a national assumption. Strike hard, collapse the enemy quickly, and force negotiations before resources became a problem. The German economy was not structured for a prolonged global conflict. It relied on limited stockpiles, captured factories, and the rapid seizure of territory to sustain further offensives across the Atlantic. The United States viewed war through an entirely different lens, even before its formal entry in December 1941. The U.S. government and industrial sector had begun preparing for large-scale mobilization. American planners believed any modern conflict would be long, material-intensive, and fought across continents. Their solution was simple but revolutionary: build more than anyone could conceive, faster than anyone believed possible. This contrast, invisible to many in 1939, became glaring as the war expanded. By 1940, Germany, despite its military brilliance, had no true equivalent to American mass production. German factories were skilled but fragmented, with competing designs, limited standardization, and political interference slowing uniform output. A panzer division required a vast array of specialized parts, each produced in smaller quantities, each demanding precise craftsmanship. Germany excelled at engineering but struggled to engineer simplicity. The US did the opposite. Its strength came from removing complexity, not adding it. Standardized trucks, standardized engines, standardized ammunition crates, millions of interchangeable components flowing through assembly lines, designed for relentless volume. Where German planners sought perfection, Americans sought quantity that worked well enough and arrived exactly when needed by the time American Lend-Lease shipments began reaching Britain and the Soviet Union in 1941. German intelligence misunderstood the scale. They saw the United States as a distant, unfocused power with little appetite for war. Many in Berlin genuinely believed America lacked the will to mobilize. Others assumed political division and economic hesitation would slow production. A few even claimed that US industry was overrated, too dependent on consumer goods, too fragmented, too slow to adapt. But the truth was already taking shape in American shipyards and factories. Liberty ships began sliding into the Atlantic at a pace no European navy could match. Aircraft plants multiplied their output every quarter. Trucks rolled off assembly lines in tens of thousands. Resources that Germany rationed, fuel, rubber, aluminum, were being allocated by the US in quantities that dwarfed entire Axis stockpiles, while German divisions fought across the vast spaces of the Soviet Union. Their logistics system strained under shortages. Motorized units increasingly relied on horses. Fuel had to be transported over stretched supply routes vulnerable to weather and partisan attacks. Attrition wore down even elite formations. Meanwhile, the United States was just beginning its full industrial acceleration. To those in Berlin, the scale was invisible. American factories were an ocean away. The US Army had not yet fought on the European continent. German intelligence reports were scattered, often underestimated, sometimes ignored. Many analysts believed the US could field combat forces but not sustain them. Then the war expanded. Again. By 1942, American troops entered North Africa, and Lend-Lease material began arriving in quantities impossible to dismiss. German commanders noticed American formations overflowing with trucks, spare parts, ammunition, and fuel. What seemed like wasteful abundance to German officers was, in truth, a carefully engineered system designed to eliminate uncertainty. Yet the clearest picture had not yet reached Berlin. Not until those supply charts were captured. Before that moment, the imbalance remained partly theoretical. German generals understood they were facing a powerful industrial opponent, but the scale remained abstract. German economists issued warnings, but military leadership believed tactical superiority and operational skill could offset production gaps. For a time, this belief seemed plausible. Victories in 1940 and early 1941 reinforced confidence. Campaigns in the Balkans and the early advances in Russia gave the impression that German fighting skill could continue to overcome shortages. But the world was changing faster than Berlin recognized. American shipyards were launching vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. Factories were producing engines, tires, radios, rifles, and clothing in quantities that made supply depth a strategic weapon. Egypt, the Caucasus, the Arctic convoys, the Pacific all were being fueled by the same colossal industrial heartbeat pulsing inside the United States. And as the war reached its midpoint, logistics ceased to be a supporting factor, and which became the decisive one. That truth would come into sharp focus when the German analysts in Zorsen unrolled the captured American charts and finally saw the numbers without filters or assumptions, charts that now demand deeper context to understand their full meaning. The transformation from abstract concern to undeniable reality began in 1942 and sharpened through 1943. This was the period when the war's industrial character became impossible to ignore. Germany still fought aggressively on multiple fronts, yet each front silently revealed the same underlying problem. The Reich was reaching the limit of what its economy could sustain, while its enemies were only beginning to reach theirs. In the North African desert, American units arrived with a level of logistical depth unlike anything the German Afrika Korps had ever faced. U.S. divisions possessed more trucks than some German corps. Fuel drums, water tanks, heavy recovery vehicles, mobile repair shops, spare engines, and crates of ammunition followed them wherever they went. Even after early tactical setbacks at Kasserine, their resupply chain absorbed losses and rebuilt strength with astonishing speed. German commanders noticed how quickly American forces returned to the field, not because of extraordinary resilience, but because nearly everything they needed existed in quantities that felt limitless. At the same time, the Atlantic shifted decisively against the U-boat arm. Germany's best hope for slowing American power had been to choke supply lines at sea. For a brief period in early 1942, the U-boats prowled the East Coast, sinking ships with alarming ease, but American shipyards responded by launching new vessels faster than submarines could sink them. Radar, code-breaking, escort carriers, and improved convoy tactics turned the tide. By mid-1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively lost for Germany. This mattered because it opened a floodgate. Every month, more material crossed the ocean, more tanks, more aircraft, more food, more fuel, more of everything Germany struggled to produce. The ocean that once protected American industry now served as a conveyor belt feeding the Allied war machine. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, German supply lines were buckling under the scale of the terrain. The distances, weather, and relentless attrition demanded enormous amounts of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts resources the German economy could no longer replace at the necessary rate. The Soviets, strengthened by Lend-Lease deliveries of trucks, locomotives, communication, equipment, and raw materials, rebuilt their armies faster than German planners thought possible. Inside Germany, the intelligence picture grew increasingly blurred. Multiple agencies, the Abwehr, Foreign Armies West, and the Economic Office of the Wehrmacht, produced conflicting assessments of American industrial potential. Some estimated conservatively, others optimistically, but none grasped the full reality. American secrecy, combined with geographic distance, left German analysts with incomplete data. They knew the U.S. was producing, but not how much. That changed with a chain of events set in motion during the North African campaign in late 1942. During the chaotic fighting that followed Operation Torch, a German reconnaissance unit intercepted a damaged American logistics vehicle belonging to a re-echelon supply group. Among the wreckage were crates filled not with weapons but documents, supply schedules, transportation timetables, fuel forecasts, and charts detailing monthly shipment capacities. The papers were organized, printed, and precise. They appeared routine, unremarkable, the everyday paperwork of an army that planned far ahead. 2 German officers, they were extraordinary. The documents were transferred through intelligence channels and eventually reached analysts in Zorsen. At first there was uncertainty. Could these be inflated or inaccurate? Were they estimates or actual figures? But as the analysts compared the charts with known shipping records and Lend-Lease vessel traffic, a pattern emerged. The numbers matched observable reality. The charts highlighted several critical insights. Fuel supply for U.S. forces was measured in millions of barrels per month, far exceeding German production. Replacement rates for vehicles and aircraft were not merely adequate. They were exponential, with output climbing every quarter. Shipping tonnage allocated for North Africa alone exceeded what Germany could deliver across all active fronts combined. Maintenance cycles were supported by industrial pipelines Germany had never built, enabling continuous readiness. The Americans planned logistics months in advance, with reserves layered upon reserves to guarantee depth. Nothing about the chart suggested strain or limitation. Instead, they revealed a system designed for a war far larger than the one Germany believed it was fighting. As the analysts studied each line, the ideological assumptions of the Reich began collapsing under the weight of arithmetic. Germany's belief that fighting skill, tactical innovation, and early momentum could overcome industrial imbalance suddenly appeared wishful. The numbers on those pages were not projections or propaganda. They were measurements of capability. This realization began flowing upward through the command structure, quietly at first, without speeches, without panic, just a steadily growing awareness that the war had shifted into a dimension where German strength held little meaning. And the deeper those analysts went into the captured data, the more angles of this unfolding truth revealed themselves, a truth that demands closer inspection from multiple perspectives. To the German analysts studying the captured charts, the first shock came not from the numbers themselves, but from what those numbers represented. They revealed a logistical system built with a level of technological integration that no European power had ever attempted. American supply strength was not merely a matter of having more factories. It was the result of an entire industrial culture geared toward movement, repair, replacement, and continuous function. The United States had engineered logistics into a battlefield weapon. Every truck model was standardized. Spare parts fit universally. Engines could be swapped within hours. Cranes mounted on trucks traveled with frontline units, lifting disabled vehicles out of the sand or mud. Portable fuel pipelines snaked across beaches and ports, replacing months of manual fuel transport. Prefabricated docks, the famous mulberries, were developed in the same spirit. Deliver capability quickly. Anywhere. Two German planners accustomed to highly specialized machinery. The simplicity of American equipment was startling. Trucks were built for ruggedness, not elegance. Tanks prioritized ease of maintenance over engineering finesse. Radios were mass-produced in identical batches, allowing seamless communication between units. Even the crates and packaging materials were engineered for rapid unloading. Germany, by comparison, operated a fragmented technological base. Dozens of competing vehicle designs required unique parts. Engines differed by manufacturer. Repair crews struggled with shortages that grew with each passing month. The American system eliminated these problems through uniformity. As the analysts examined the captured charts, they realized the numbers were only the surface. The true power lay underneath a logistics machine designed not merely to support war, but to sustain it indefinitely. This technological foundation naturally connected to the next angle, the human force. Behind it, the captured charts showed output, but they did not show the people behind the numbers. Millions of American workers mobilized into the greatest industrial effort in history, yet the analysts understood enough to see what the charts implied. Such production required a vast, motivated, and coordinated workforce, and that workforce was unlike anything Germany could marshal. American factories during the war became communities of effort. Women entered industries at unprecedented levels, taking roles in welding, machining, riveting, assembly, and inspection. Immigrant labor, African American workers, and previously marginalized groups filled the manufacturing lines. Instead of weakening productivity, this expansion strengthened it, creating a labor pool far larger than anything Germany could match. The U.S. government coordinated production with private industries in a way that allowed innovation and mass output to coexist. Companies that once built refrigerators or automobiles converted into factories producing aircraft engines and armored vehicles. Manufacturers were encouraged to streamline designs, reduce costs, and eliminate unnecessary features, all to improve volume and reliability. Meanwhile, Germany's labor system strained under ideological limits. Forced labor became a cornerstone of wartime industry, but it brought inefficiencies, sabotage risks, and declining productivity. Skilled workers were drafted into the army. Factories dispersed under Allied bombing lost cohesion and efficiency. Industrial decisions were often influenced by internal politics rather than practical needs. The American workforce, by contrast, operated under a unifying national mission, supported by a steady flow of materials, wages, and clear goals. Every ship launched, every tank assembled, every spare part packed into a crate reflected this collective effort, and with every human hand adding strength to the assembly lines, American divisions in the field received the endurance the charts now revealed, endurance that shaped the tactical angle unfolding on the battlefield. When German analysts read the captured U.S. supply documents, the tactical implications became impossible to ignore. The charts did not describe military theory. They revealed why American formations fought in a way Germany had rarely encountered. US forces could sustain operations with a tempo that defied German expectations because their logistics network eliminated the pauses that normally slowed armies on the battlefield. This translated into operational momentum. American armored Divisions carried enough fuel to operate for extended periods without immediate resupply. Their artillery units possessed ammunition stocks that dwarfed German capabilities. Replacement vehicles arrived so quickly that damaged battalions returned to strength in days rather than weeks. Medical supply abundance reduced casualties. Radios ensured coordination at every level, allowing flexible responses to unexpected situations. German units, by comparison, often rationed shells, fuel, or spare parts even before major offensives. Tactically, this meant American commanders could absorb losses and immediately press forward. A tank battalion crippled in one engagement might return with full strength after a night of repair. Infantry divisions rotated gear, boots, and rations with a rhythm Germany could not disrupt. The tactical philosophy of firepower and mobility was supported by a logistical engine that ensured neither ever ran dry. Two German analysts. The meaning was unmistakable. American battlefield power was not defined by individual weapons or tactics alone. It was defined by a logistical depth that guaranteed sustained combat readiness, a depth that charts quantified in stark numbers, and these angles together began forming a picture too large to ignore, a picture that would widen even more as deeper aspects of the German system came under scrutiny. As the captured American supply charts circulated through the analysis departments, they did not cause loud debates or heated arguments. Instead, they triggered something far more revealing: silence. The German leadership, from economic ministries to the military command, already sensed the imbalance. But seeing the numbers stripped of speculation forced a quiet reckoning. Albert Speer, appointed Minister of Armaments in 1942, had begun rationalizing production and streamlining factory output. Under his reforms, German manufacturing efficiency improved. Yet even Speer privately acknowledged that no amount of reorganization could close the gap. Germany lacked raw materials, oil, standardized designs, and labor capacity. Industry was geographically compressed, vulnerable to bombing, and politically constrained by rival Nazi institutions fighting for influence. High-ranking officers such as Jardel and later Guderian had long warned Hitler that Germany's resource base could not sustain a prolonged, multi-front war. Hitler, however, dismissed many logistical concerns, believing willpower, ideology, and tactical brilliance would outweigh industrial deficits. This mindset filtered down into operational planning, leading to offensives launched without adequate fuel, ammunition, or replacement vehicles. The captured charts forced a confrontation with reality that ideology could not obscure. They confirmed with cold arithmetic that the United States was producing more in months than Germany could in years, and those numbers reflected a system built for global war, not regional campaigns. To the German leadership, the charts were not merely evidence of enemy strength. They were a mirror held up to the structural weaknesses of the Reich. Weaknesses now impossible to rationalize away. This leadership recognition intertwined with how German soldiers themselves viewed American abundance on the battlefield, forming the next critical angle. Even before the captured charts arrived, frontline reports had been hinting at the same truth. German soldiers and officers in North Africa, Italy, and later France observed firsthand what the documents now quantified. American forces operated as though shortages did not exist. Africa Corps officers noted that U.S. positions remained supplied even after heavy bombardment. Artillery crews fired in volumes that shocked German observers, seemingly unconcerned about conserving shells. Tank units replaced damaged vehicles rapidly, sometimes exchanging entire engines in hours. American engineers repaired roads, bridges, and port facilities with machines German units rarely possessed. One recurring observation appeared in multiple field reports: the Americans never run out. On the Eastern Front, captured Soviet vehicles often bore markings indicating U.S. origin: Studebaker trucks, Dodge transports, and American-made radios. These sightings reinforced the perception that American industry supported not just its own forces but entire Allied armies. After the Normandy landings, the scale became undeniable: a seemingly endless flow of trucks, jeeps, fuel cans, bulldozers, and medical supplies poured onto the beaches, creating a logistical tsunami that pushed inland faster than German forces could react. The famed Red Ball Express delivered supplies day and night, its steady columns of vehicles conveying a sense of unstoppable momentum. These frontline observations gave emotional weight to the cold numbers in the charts. Soldiers who faced American units knew the implications intuitively. An enemy backed by such abundance did not fight under the same constraints. They could afford mistakes, losses, and delays. Germany could not. And beneath these tactical and human observations lay something deeper, a moral contradiction embedded in the ideological foundations of the Reich. The captured supply charts confronted not only German strategy, but the ideological convictions that shaped it. Nazi ideology framed war as a contest of racial strength, leadership, and willpower. The regime believed that Germany's superior soldier and superior spirit would overcome the numerical advantage of industrial democracies. Hitler repeatedly dismissed the United States as a nation of materialists, lacking cultural unity and martial character. The charts shattered this belief. They demonstrated that modern warfare rewarded not mythology but organization, integration, and rational planning. In the United States, a democracy with political divisions, competing industries, and diverse populations had mobilized with a unity and efficiency far beyond what Nazi Germany had achieved under authoritarian rule. Even more unsettling was how American production reflected values the Reich considered weaknesses: openness to innovation, decentralized initiative, economic freedom, and social mobility. These principles had created a flexible, adaptive industrial system capable of sustaining unprecedented output. In contrast, Germany's rigid hierarchy, ideological purity tests, and internal political rivalries suffocated the very efficiency the war demanded. The moral implication was clear: the world Hitler sought to conquer had outgrown the type of empire he tried to build. Industrial reality did not bend to ideology. The Americans had transformed their society into a machine of practical strength, while Germany clung to illusions of inherent superiority. By the time the analysts finished reviewing the charts, the ideological foundation of the war and the belief that German will could compensate for material limits had already been undermined. These converging angles set the stage for the decisive moment at the center of this story, when Germany finally confronted the full meaning of the numbers spread across that steel table: black and white, archival tone, heavy tension, battlefield realism. As the night deepens, the distant rumble of artillery rolls like thunder across the valley. The camera closes in on the exhausted soldiers' faces smeared with dirt, silhouettes trembling in the cold wind, yet their eyes burn with a fierce, unbroken resolve. Searchlights sweep over the ruined landscape, revealing shattered trees, collapsed bunkers, and the metallic shine of helmets lying abandoned in the mud. Suddenly the silence fractures, a piercing whistle, a streak of tracers ripping through the darkness. The men dive for cover as explosions erupt around them, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Dust clouds swallow everything, and for a moment the battlefield becomes a ghostly white haze. Out of that haze, enemy silhouettes emerge, slow at first, then growing, multiplying, advancing with chilling precision. The camera shifts into slow motion, boots pounding the ground, gun barrels flashing, debris flying in all directions. Each soldier's breath becomes visible in the frigid air as they brace for impact, and then a deafening roar from behind them. Engines ignite, metal screams. Reinforcements arrive, cutting through the chaos with overwhelming force. The battlefield transforms into a storm of smoke, fire, and thunder as both sides crash toward each other in a final, decisive confrontation. The climax has begun. Black and white, tone, intense documentary realism. The battlefield trembles as the reinforcements push forward, their engines growling like wounded beasts. Dust rises in thick waves, drifting across the shattered landscape. The camera tracks low along the ground, empty shell casings bouncing, boots sliding across mud, flashes of rifles lighting up the smoke. A commanding voice cuts through the chaos: hold this line, no matter what comes through that fog. The soldiers tighten their grip on their weapons. Their breath shakes, their helmets tremble from the concussions. Every man knows what's at stake. There is no room to fall back, no second chance. Then, through the smoke, new sounds emerge, deep, metallic, mechanical. The enemy is bringing armor. A silhouette forms, then another, then 5 more. Tank turrets rotate slowly, like predators searching for their prey. The American reinforcements spread out, diving behind broken walls, overturned trucks, and craters carved by artillery. Machine gun nests open fire, rattling with a fury that echoes across the valley. A soldier shouts above the roar: they're coming straight through us. Prepare the charges. The cameraman's lens shakes violently as the first enemy shell explodes, sending debris in every direction. The shockwave knocks men off their feet. Dirt rains down like black snow. But amid the destruction, one thing becomes clear: they're not retreating. They're not breaking. This is the moment everything has been building toward, the point where courage, desperation, and fate collide. The morning light creeps over the battlefield, pale and unforgiving. Smoke curls in slow spirals from charred wrecks, for the ground is a quilt of mud, blood, and twisted metal. Yet the flow of men and machinery refuses to halt. German commanders glance at maps, where tracing lines down their dust-streaked faces. Reports pour in: fuel reserves are critical, ammunition running low, reinforcements delayed. Every calculation confirms the same unbearable truth: they cannot sustain the fight. The analysts back in Zone, poring over the captured American charts, realize it now in stark clarity. Numbers on paper. Millions of gallons of fuel, thousands of replacement vehicles. Ships arriving by the dozens are no longer abstract. They are a tidal wave, moving inexorably toward the European front. Back on the field, American supply units push forward relentlessly. Trucks loaded with fuel, ammo, and spare parts surge over bridges and through makeshift roads. Artillery is resupplied before crews even notice what they've fired. The enemy lines, however disciplined, begin to buckle under the pressure of what seems like limitless provision. A German officer whispers to his aide: "We cannot match them in time." The camera pans across the battlefield. Soldiers' faces reflect exhaustion, fear, and the bitter understanding of inevitability. Smoke rises from burning vehicles, yet more roll forward, powered by a system Germany cannot replicate. The clash of steel and fire continues, but the outcome has already been written not in bullets or shells, but in factories, docks, and supply charts thousands of miles away. The climax peaks not in heroic charges, but in a quiet, terrifying realization: the arithmetic of war cannot be defied. Germany's skill, courage, and strategy are powerless against the sheer scale of American production and logistics. The war, as the analysts had now confirmed, is no longer about tactics alone. It is about numbers, and the numbers have already decided the future. The battlefield roars on, but the true battle has been lost before a single decisive blow is struck. The smoke cleared, leaving a battlefield strewn with the detritus of conflict: charred vehicles, broken artillery, crumpled helmets, and the still figures of men who had fought and fallen. Yet the most profound destruction was not visible to the naked eye. It lay in the comprehension that German command could not deny. The logistical superiority of the United States was an irreversible reality. In the days following the battles, German generals reviewed reports with mounting alarm. Every front told the same story. On the Eastern Front, motorized divisions, starved for fuel and ammunition, could not advance, while Soviet formations, increasingly equipped with US-supplied trucks and artillery, regained territory with methodical efficiency. In Italy and France, Allied units pushed relentlessly, resupplied overnight, their operational tempo unbroken by weather, terrain, or enemy action. The numbers in the captured charts, once abstract and theoretical, were now evident in every engagement, every delay, every exhausted column of German troops. Albert Speer, reflecting in his wartime notes, acknowledged the structural imbalance with bitter clarity. Even with expanded production programs, the Reich's industrial output could never approach the scale revealed in the charts. Factories were bombed, transportation networks disrupted, and raw materials in short supply. Germany's war economy, which relied heavily on improvisation and captured resources, was no match for the standardized, mass-produced strength of the United States. Every calculation made it clear: German forces would fight with courage and ingenuity, but they would always be constrained by limits the Allies could ignore. This stark imbalance forced strategic shifts. Offensive operations were curtailed or delayed, replaced by defensive measures aimed at conserving fuel and munitions. Divisions were rationed, supplies stockpiled in anticipation of attacks, and plans recalibrated constantly to account for what could not be replaced. Field commanders increasingly faced the grim reality: even tactical brilliance could not offset the absence of essential resources. Beyond strategy, the charts instilled a psychological shift in German leadership. Officers who had once believed that skill, discipline, or morale could compensate for material shortages now understood the numerical truth of modern warfare. Reports from intelligence units confirmed the figures. American supply convoys arrived in Europe in quantities that outpaced losses. Replacement vehicles, ammunition, and fuel flowed faster than Germany could calculate attrition. German soldiers noticed a relentless rhythm in Allied operations, a certainty in their advance that no tactical maneuver could halt. The captured charts had therefore done more than reveal capacity. They revealed inevitability. Where German troops fought bravely, they did so against a force whose endurance was engineered in factories thousands of miles away. No surprise attack, no tactical genius, no elite formation could change the arithmetic. The war was entering a phase where victory depended less on courage and more on industrial depth, and Germany's depth was insufficient. And as commanders began adjusting to this reality, they set in motion defensive strategies and rationing systems that foreshadowed the coming collapse. The inability to sustain offensives, the shortage of fuel for mobile units, and the gradual erosion of frontline effectiveness, each decision made in response to the captured charts carried the quiet acknowledgement of defeat, long before the final battles had begun. The aftermath of this realization rippled through the military, the economy, and the psyche of the Reich. It would shape not only the months to come but the final year of the war itself, where German forces would struggle to survive against an opponent whose supply lines were inexhaustible, precise, and deadly. By 1944, the consequences of the captured supply charts had begun to manifest across all German fronts. The Wehrmacht's defensive operations were stretched to breaking point. Fuel shortages grounded tanks and trucks. Artillery units often fired a fraction of the shells they required. Medical and repair services lagged behind the advancing tide. Commanders attempted improvisation, diverting fuel from one sector to another, cannibalizing vehicles, or postponing offensives indefinitely. Yet every measure was temporary, and every calculation underscored the same unavoidable fact: Germany could not compete with the sustained, industrial-backed momentum of the Allies. The Normandy landings in June 1944 made this reality unmistakable. As thousands of trucks, jeeps, and armored vehicles poured onto the beaches, German field reports captured the magnitude of the supply effort. The famed Red Ball Express kept frontline units fed and mobile, operating round the clock to maintain the Allied advance. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts arrived with machine-like reliability, enabling US and British forces to exploit every breakthrough. The charts previously captured in North Africa now seemed prophetic, revealing a logistical depth Germany could never hope to match. On the Eastern Front, the impact was equally severe. Soviet forces, supplemented by American Lend-Lease trucks, tanks, and locomotives, advanced steadily. German defensive lines collapsed under the relentless pressure, with units unable to replace losses or reposition effectively. German officers noted bitterly that their opponents' operational flexibility derived not from exceptional leadership alone, but from resources that allowed mistakes to be absorbed and corrected within days, a capability Germany could not replicate by late 1944. German industry itself was crippled by Allied bombing campaigns. Factories producing tanks, aircraft, and munitions were destroyed or disrupted. Transportation networks bombed, and raw material shortages worsened. The numbers on the charts now reflected the operational reality. Germany was fighting a war it could not sustain, while its enemies fought one they could maintain indefinitely. In strategic terms, the Reich shifted from offensive ambitions to defensive survival. Operations that required deep penetration, rapid movement, or heavy sustained firepower were scaled back or abandoned entirely. Fuel rationing and strict logistical prioritization became the rule, forcing commanders to limit initiatives and cede the initiative to Allied forces. Battles became increasingly reactive, fought with insufficient resources and under the shadow of attrition that could not be replaced. The final months of 1944 and early 1945 were marked by a slow, inexorable collapse. The Ardennes offensive, a desperate gamble, failed partly because logistical limitations constrained maneuverability and resupply. On all fronts, Allied forces advanced with confidence, supported by a logistical machine that ensured the momentum could never be halted. The analysts in Zossen had predicted this long before the first tanks crossed the Rhine. The numbers had already dictated the outcome by the time German forces surrendered in May 1945. The captured supply charts from years earlier had proven prophetic. The war was decided not merely in battles, but in factories, docks, and warehouses, thousands of miles away. The Reich's tactical skill, strategic brilliance, and soldierly courage had been rendered insufficient against the overwhelming, methodical, and sustained production capacity of the United States. The arithmetic of war had triumphed over ideology, daring, and even battlefield genius. The aftermath was clear. Germany's inability to match Allied logistics had shaped every phase of the war from 1943 onward. The charts had revealed a truth that no plan, offensive, or maneuver could reverse, a truth that set the stage for history's final reflection on industrial warfare, human endeavor, and the decisive power of supply. The war did not end with a single battle. It ended with a realization that had been quietly unfolding in the shadows of command rooms, factories, and supply depots. The captured American charts, once mere columns of numbers, had revealed a fundamental truth. Modern warfare was not won solely on courage, tactics, or leadership. It was won in the quiet, methodical work of production lines, docks, and distribution networks. Germany had fought with brilliance, audacity, and discipline. Its soldiers displayed extraordinary valor. Its commanders executed campaigns of unprecedented speed and coordination. Yet all of these qualities collided against a wall of arithmetic. The United States, through sheer industrial scale, relentless planning, and human ingenuity, could replace what was lost, sustain what was advanced, and endure what was destroyed. Where Germany rationed, the Allies supplied. Where Germany paused, the Americans pressed forward. The lesson extends beyond statistics and maps. It lies in understanding the machinery of war as an extension of society itself. Factories became front lines. Workers became combatants. Supply charts became as critical as battle orders. Victory was not simply a matter of strategy. It was a reflection of a nation's capacity to organize, produce, and sustain itself under the pressures of global conflict. The captured charts had stripped away ideology, propaganda, and hope. They left only numbers immutable, undeniable, decisive. They revealed that warfare had evolved into a system where human courage alone could not offset the imbalance of resources. And in recognizing this, German leadership came face to face with a truth that could not be denied. The war was already slipping beyond their grasp, not because of a single loss, but because the machinery behind the enemy could never be matched on the end. The story is not one of defeat or victory alone. It is a story of scale, of human organization, and of the quiet power of preparation. It is a reminder that in modern war, the lines on a page, fuel charts, tonnage tables, replacement schedules can weigh heavier than any army, and that the fate of nations may rest not in the heat of battle, but in the relentless arithmetic of supply. The numbers had spoken. Germany had listened too late.